Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip. I'm still an animal. I change shapes just to hide in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip. I'm still an animal. I change shapes just to hide in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip. I'm still an animal. I change shapes just to hide in this place, but I'm still an animal. Nobody knows it but me when I slip. Yeah, I slip. I'm still an animal.
Good morning, everyone. So how was yesterday? Good. So we're excited to move on to our third day today, which is about catalyzing action. So you would have remembered that the first day we wanted to inspire and connect. The second day, we're looking to have an educational experience. And today is about catalyzing action. In line with that, I wanted to switch to the next slide here. Oh yeah, here it is. So we have a student group that has done quite a lot of work in their early days, and they are now launching a corporate governance pledge. So this is a plug for the group, but it's an important plug. If you're a student, or if you know students that want to get involved with this student group, definitely reach out. There's actually, you can go to rxcstudents.org to see their work. They have a great website. They very well represent the ideas of RadicalxChange broadly. And they also have a pledge, so they wanted me to give a plug for that, and I was willing to do it because it's very important. So now I'm going to invite Mark Lutter to the stage to introduce our first panel.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm delighted to open our morning with a fireside chat between Natalia, Olson-Urtecho, and Rahilla Zafar. To introduce Natalia, she is an entrepreneur and an expert in government, the commercialization of clean technologies, transportation, energy, environmental planning, public engagement, and infrastructure development. Prior to her current position as the founder of Infotech 21 and the co-founder and chief innovation officer of the Disruption Factory, she was appointed by Obama as the U.S. Small Business Administration's Mid-Atlantic Regional Administrator. She has held senior management positions in the public and private sector in the U.S., Central Europe, Asia, and Latin America. She has been honored with numerous prestigious awards, including recognition as a Latina powerhouse by the Maryland Hispanic Business Conference, Most Influential Latino in Delaware Valley in 2014, Philadelphia Business Journal's 2010 Minority Business Leader Award, and Woman of Distinction for her work in sustainable infrastructure and the green economy. Natalia will be joined in Fireside Chat with Rahilla Zafar. She is the Managing Director at Consensus, helping to open the Middle East market. She was working with me on the activism and government track. She has helped launch Consensus's Global Smart Cities Initiative and has a deep history of research and writing on Middle Eastern and global women's issues and working with international organizations. She contributes to numerous publications from the Financial Times to Quartz. And I'm really excited for this panel because a lot of these discussions have been focused on relatively high-level ideas. And one of the things that I hope to do with activism and government track is to bring these high-level ideas down to meaningful application. And both of these, both of the speakers have a wealth of experience in actually applying new and radical ideas and figuring out what it takes to make them work on the ground. And with that, I'd like to welcome them to the stage.
Good morning, Detroit. Is everyone up and awake? Yeah.
And thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. So I was very excited to meet Natalia in the fall in Spain. And I think the reason why she and I really connected was because from my experience working in a lot of different countries around the world, including developing countries, I think that oftentimes there's a lot of fixation around microfinance and supporting artisans and things like that, which of course are important. But I think that there's not a lot of emphasis or understanding that there are incredible small business owners and medium-sized business owners, in developing countries. Even in places like Afghanistan, there are illiterate women that are running businesses that are employing like 10 or 12 people. And if they had access to loans and mentorship, they could really scale their companies. And in a lot of countries around the world that don't have middle classes, or it's a very important tool in terms of supporting these types of entrepreneurs. So these countries around the world can develop a middle class like we have in the United States. So I think that a lot of the history that you've had, particularly working with the Small Business Administration that oversees $100 billion, you were managing $35 billion of government contracts and $8 billion in loans for SMEs. What I was really surprised was I didn't know the history of that in terms of 5% of that money. It used to be 2%, and now 5% goes to women entrepreneurs. And it also helped launch a lot of businesses from Under Armour to Sequoia to Intel. So if you could speak a little bit about that and maybe how other parts of the world have been able to successfully model that.
All in 5 minutes. So a lot of folks don't know that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, is actually an agency that focuses only on helping small businesses. That's where companies like Qualcomm got an SBIR grant. Actually, they got 6. That's how they got started. They have the SBIC program. That's how Draper Jerverton got started. That's how Silicon Valley, when we have, got started. Many, many examples. We have disadvantaged zones in the country, and so when the silicon industry went down, the government stepped in and said, we need to go ahead and help our companies. And there's a really interesting division of power and influence. Our government tends to not want to get too much involved, but also wants to help, which is a great example, I think, of what happens in this country when we stimulate the economy by helping small businesses. During the Great Recession, we came into administration. Obama inherited an economy that was in shambles. We needed to change that. We needed to get capital out there. So we doubled the amount. We figured out how the government, as a catalyst, was going to help businesses get started because no one else was hiring small businesses. No one else was actually spending money. So what we did was, in the Jobs Act, we improved that and said 23% of everything the U.S. government has to buy has to come from small businesses. And so that increased the amount of women-owned companies to be able to sell to the U.S. government. What does that mean? That means that in 2015, we were able to reach that 5% goal, and that meant $17 billion in that 1 year went to small business owned by women. That's tremendous, because that didn't cost the government money. This is only saying we as a government are going to go make sure that we procure from small businesses, minority-owned companies, veteran-owned companies, disadvantaged communities. And so we were able to really move that and get that capital out there, because what is it that small businesses want? They need capital in order for them to grow. And so it was definitely an interesting time, because we had to rebuild an economy, and we had to build it from every side. We made a lot of mistakes. No administration is perfect, but we had to go ahead and pass legislations and policies that really were going to incentivize. We created, one of the first things that Obama signed, actually was the first one, was the Open Data Executive Order. That created open source, that created, we were going to open our APIs, we were going to really get technology to help us improve that and help tech companies rise and grow. So this was 10 years ago. And so imagine everything that has happened.
And in terms of other countries around the world, I mean, some of the challenges is, like, for example, if you take a loan in a country and you default, you'll go to jail. So, I mean, how have you seen, just in your advisory roles and support that you've done around the world, what are some positive changes you've seen?
Sure. And my first job was NATO and EU accession for Central Europe. And so this was, mid-90s. And we were helping countries that were coming out of communism and had to adapt to new ways of capitalism. And so I saw a lot of changes that needed to happen, but some of them weren't great. You have to understand the psychic of being under communism for 50 years, and all of a sudden you have all these freedoms and you can do all these things. And I thought, we really need to figure out better models, and we really need to have a better dialogue. And so I was very excited when President Obama really moved on the sense of creating models for other countries as well. So when we signed the free trade agreements, we actually, with Colombia and Panama and South Korea, one of the things that we really emphasize is, how do we create agencies? How do we create models like the small business development centers? These small business development centers lie in all the different universities, and they, are there's mentors there, there's counseling, there's ways of how you can get capital. And so we created this model in Latin America. And so Colombia, for example, I was so excited when you see work come back to you and see the amount of impact it's had. We have now 117 small business development centers throughout Colombia. That are in rural areas, that have created thousands of jobs already, and are creating all these small businesses. So these models are excellent. Now, what needs to happen in these developing countries as well is how to use governments. Like Spain, for example, not even 2% of what the government buys is from a small business. That needs to change. We do 23%. Has to be bought from a small business. So how do we start teaching governments how to use their power of purchase to help companies get started? And it has to, regulations have to happen, legislation. It moves where the citizen actually. That's why one of the reasons I love the blockchain, because it engages citizens, and it turns it on its head and says, it challenges the elected officials to act. It said, what are you doing for me? What is it that you're doing? How are you using the financing? And so one of the things that we did in the Obama administration for the Reinvestment Act, which $800 billion of that was being spent, it actually helped us track all that money and figure out where it was going. And so people started thinking, oh, there's all this information. What is it? What is the transparency? And so there's great examples there of transparency and how we can move forward with real change and real movements, because we need that in our country today. We can't keep being so divisive right now, and we need to work together.
And you talked about there were 2 significant executive orders that President Obama signed that significantly helped improve transparency. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then also how you see tools such as blockchain, like you mentioned, and also quadratic voting in supporting that, like not just here, but elsewhere.
Sure. The folks remember net neutrality? So originally, a lot of this information, when we did the open data, the administration did the open data initiative, called for us to start looking at how the ISPs and from the different companies were actually being used. Was it protecting the consumer? Was it protecting competition? Was it actually being fair? And so we got a lot of rap from the Republicans saying, no, this is you're overstepping government powers and you're getting too involved. But we were able to pass it in 2015, and the idea there was, how do we stimulate transparency of information? Okay, there was so much information in the federal agencies that in the previous administration, Bush administration, they had classified this as secret information. It's public information. It's being paid by your tax dollars. It's your information. Therefore, it needs to be public. But there's this fear. There was this fear of, we can't release information because we don't know how the citizens are going to use it. No, that doesn't make any sense. And so the concept there was, how do we actually enable citizens to be able to use the information, right? And so stuff that was supposed to be top secret, all of a sudden got declassified. And it was funny because I used to have top secret clearance, and I would look at this information and be like, this is not top secret. It's not affecting, it's not national security. And so we were able to release all that information. And even though we couldn't hire people. So we had so remember, we were in the Great Recession. We couldn't hire people. We couldn't get raises. We had all of a sudden all this work to do, and we have 2 million civil employees. And so morale was really low. So how do we incentivize? Well, we brought in people from everywhere, especially from the technology side. We had the first hackathons, and now there's hackathons in all 50 states. We brought in, teams, and we created challenges. So there's all these things that weren't working in the government. So we created all these little, great challenges. You win $20,000 if you present a great idea for this particular challenge in the Department of Health. And so to the health point, digital medical records. Remember that? I know we didn't have the best system in place when we launched Obamacare online. It was a great learning experience. But making sure that your digital medical information was up online took a long time. And I'm not saying we have wins yet. I see all these numbers of people saying, well, the doctors and clinicians are not being as productive because they're spending too much time on learning all these new ways of technology when they were so used to legacy systems. And now you want us to share all this data across states and across different medical institutions. But that enabled, again, for people, that all those rules and executive orders and legislation, that enabled for people to have better information and have a hold on their personal data. And anyone remember the Seinfeld episode when Elaine is trying to steal her medical records, and it's just impossible for this woman to get her medical records? That's just wrong. So things like that we were able to at least trigger the conversation and trigger the technology to be enabled, and for people from outside to tell us what to do, because government is supposed to be an enabler, an entity that brings the stakeholders together, that brings out innovation. We're not supposed to build everything and do everything. So we need that cooperation, that collaboration, those folks to help us do that in the government and help us with real strong policies.
So I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, and I was struck by all the green initiatives happening there, and just all the policies around building and all of that in terms of thinking about the environment. And then I found out that you were behind a lot of them. And then I got to hear some of the stories about, we're at a RadicalxChange conference, in terms of how you faced a lot of opposition and you were even threatened. If you could talk a little bit about that.
I'll have a drink now. No, so I've always been lucky to have worked with great leaders. And Mayor Nutter, previous mayor of Philadelphia, no one thought he was going to win. And all of a sudden he won. And so Michael had said that he was going to make Philadelphia a better city, that we were going to really focus on development. And he didn't know very many planners. I was one of them. And so the law was that you had to appoint an urban planner to the planning commission and zoning commissions. So he's like, you're going to do both. I'm like, okay, great. And I'm not a Philadelphian. So Philly is a very interesting town. I love Philadelphia. It has a lot of character. It's a very union related town, but very much a neighborhood. Like my neighborhood is my kingdom. And you still see what you see in Rocky movies. It's still South Philadelphia. It's still like that. So people weren't really big on change. So we said, we're going to, we're going to go ahead and start building up to LEED standards. We're going to go ahead and have green buildings. We're going to go ahead and have healthier buildings. We're going to go and have, parks, better parks, and improve all this. And so no one likes change, especially when it's ingrained so much that, first, I'm a foreigner, according to them. I've never had any other passport except the American one, but I'm not from Philadelphia. And then this idea, so you're going to change the way we build. So I had we were threatened a lot from every developer that my house was going to be burnt down. I was almost thrown off the Comcast tower. And so bringing change, I was the youngest one on both boards. And I was very quiet the first month. And I just kept thinking, when Tristan yesterday talked about the adults have a plan, I kept thinking, someone has to have a plan. I'm the kid here. And I had to speak up because I thought, this is ridiculous. We have all these old ancient rules that are not working. And so we had to rebuild the entire comprehensive plan and a whole new zoning code for the 5th largest city in the country. And that meant we were going to do sustainable practices. And so every neighborhood, went up in arms. Every neighborhood thought, I have my own way of doing it. I've been doing it for 50 years. And so what I did was something very simple. I said, okay, fine. We're going to go ahead, and we have these television guides, television cameras. And so every city has a channel, right? So we were going to film all of our boards, and we were going to go at night to every neighborhood, okay? And talk about what we wanted to do. So citizen engagement, getting people down to, to understand what that meant. And so we used technology. I mean, I think that Parks and Recreation was actually, built on what we were doing. Because people would come up to me in the street and go, oh my God, that was amazing. For the first time I knew what was happening in my city. And they were getting engaged. They were coming to the meetings. We were like out there making sure that they knew. But still to this day, I have people come up to me and say, thank you for asking me, because no one had asked me in 50 years. No one had asked me for my opinion on my neighborhood. So we had to take our own, things into our own arms and our own hands and do what we could. But then I said no to casinos. So well-designed casinos were fine, but badly designed casinos weren't great. So here I go against every developer and now big national casino companies. And I'm like, we need better casinos. And I like for them to be green. That doesn't resonate very much. And so we had a lot of new threats and so on, but we were able to. Why I bring that up is because my vote, I said no. Everyone else voted yes, and I said no. And that one vote enabled an entire movement in Philadelphia to say the urban planner is saying no to casinos. And it just started a whole wave of people going protests, coming up with better policies, coming up with better spaces for the casinos, not a prime waterfront. So an entire one small action can actually go a long way, and not be afraid. My ex-husband was very afraid. That's why he's ex. So he thought, literally, our home is going to definitely get burnt down this time. And so, we cannot give up. Don't give up the fight. And I had I had this older gentleman come up to me and say, my 8-year-old granddaughter won't get into my SUV anymore. And it's all your fault. I now have to go and buy a green car. And I'm like, thank God for that granddaughter and for the youth. Dios mío. And that granddaughter is now 20 years old and can vote. So I really thought this is what we need to focus is on the youth and getting the younger millennials and anyone else and to work together with every population that this means something. That one action of that young girl made this gentleman buy a Prius. So hey, sometimes it works.
Yeah, and yesterday I saw the film Poverty Inc. here, and I think you and I were talking about it a little bit in terms of, and you gave the example, because I think the film touched a lot about some of the problems with international aid and even company like Tom, like the Buy One, Give One program, how they're very well intentioned, but sometimes they can hurt small business owners in developing countries. And you had mentioned, when you worked President Obama, there was a change in like the whole concept of economic diplomacy, and instead of having traditional aid, you were helping small businesses.
So yeah, this was, I grew up in the State Department, and I grew up all over the world, and I had seen a lot of really stupid aid coming through to developing countries. You cannot just give stuff. You have to help countries and entities do stuff. You cannot just give aid because then it keeps, it's not a good machine. And so economic diplomacy with, Secretary Kerry actually pushed a lot on this, was how do we actually teach countries to, do more training, to improve on their education, to figure out like the small business development centers. How do you build a company? How do we start having scientists? Because what 9/11 had cost was a division in information of science programs across the world. So how are we going to start talking and having scientists talk with other scientists and technology folks talk across the different borders? So we had entrepreneurship ambassadors go around the world and talk about all these amazing things that were happening in the U.S., but could also be happening in other countries. We talked about like ways that something so simple like the science fairs. So the president started this whole science fairs in 2010 to bring in kids from all over the country to talk about their special projects. All of a sudden, science fairs in other countries were starting to pop up. So enable young kids to be able to do that. So more than anything, I think we really need to go ahead and help other countries with good models of doing stuff. Apprenticeships. So we took a model from Germany, apprenticeship program. Folks, might not want to go to school the first year, might not want to go to the university the first year because they don't know what to do to study. So how about doing an apprenticeship your first year and figuring out what you might be interested in? We need a lot of technology folks. We need a lot of engineers. We need a lot of developers. We need a lot of graphic artists, everything possible to make sure that we grew the economy. So we took that model from Germany, and I think that model works really well. We were able to allocate money to it. And really focus on advanced manufacturing. So we were, advanced manufacturing was a big thing for us, how we were going to start really doing more high-tech manufacturing in the country. How are we going to actually, completely use technology, automated technology, and figure out what the effects were of that and how we were going to bring that into the U.S. So, and we took a lot of that from Europe, some of the ideas of Europe and Japan. So it's all of this interchange of ideas that we should have always available and not be afraid of having borders borders do not help innovation. We have people from all over the world here. Our country is made up from people from all over the world. And so we really need to make sure that continues to happen.
If anyone has questions, feel free to come over. I think that what struck me a lot, because I've been doing a lot of field research in terms of women and international development, and it's particularly like like economics of countries and supporting small business owners for like almost 2 decades. And I think that I was just very impressed, like especially when I was doing field research for the Internet of Women, in terms of, in like rural parts of the United States that never had up to date, like small business centers or training, to the reason why I was spending, like, I'm Pakistani, I'm not Middle Eastern, but the reason why I was spending so much time in the Arab world was because there are so many women computer science majors and they were starting so many businesses. And it was like one of the first times, especially in places like Saudi Arabia, where they had the opportunity to do things like that. And it was very fascinating to document. So go ahead.
So what would you like to see come out of this conference? Concrete steps.
You know what I like about this conference, because I've sat through a lot of the meetings and everything, is that people are not complaining, they're providing solutions. So if anyone comes up to me with a complaint, I'm like, come up to me with a solution. And I think this is what I've seen throughout the workshop. So thank you again to Radical Change, because it's about, there's all this stuff that's happening. Yes, bad. It might be not great and so on, but come up with solutions. Tell us what we need to do, or create a movement that is comprehensive, that is actionable, and start prioritizing. What is it that we need to do? How do we do that? Well, we bring ideas, we bring thought leaders, we bring folks that are action oriented. I mean, today, after this, I want to see for people to say, you know what, I have a task. This is what I'm going to do for the next 6 months. This is how I'm going to contribute to RadicalxChange. This is what my mission is going to be for the next 6 months to the year, and I'm going to be faithful to that. And I think that's what's amazing about the group of people that they've been able to rally and bring together here. So what I want to see is action and less divisive conversations.
The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about that I was really, I agree with you. Okay. Yeah. That's good. Everything you said. I was pretty struck by some of the stories you were telling me in terms of you were part of Hillary Clinton's campaign in Florida, and that I was just shocked that this was happening like in the United States, like, it just in terms of people were given misinformation on how to vote and where to vote, and they could go and vote in grocery stores and things like that. So if you could talk a little bit about that and what is being done to improve it, and what more can we do to help?
Sure. God, I still remember that day. So in Florida, you have the 2 weeks, so you can vote 2 weeks before the elections. And Florida was very contested in several elections. And so we had a big team of lawyers, because we created the Protect the Voter program. And so we had like 600 lawyers down in Florida. We were trying to see trends of fraud. If anyone, we had a call center of every language possible. Anyone like had heard or was contacted with information they didn't feel comfortable with, to let us know, and then we could start looking at the trends. People were calling saying that they were told they could vote in supermarkets, that they just had to wait until sending their voter registration on the day of elections, meaning that they wouldn't get the paperwork back. They got so much misinformation. We got hacked a few times, and it was wrong in so many levels, right? I had people calling saying, I haven't voted in 30 years, but I think this is going to be key. We need to vote, and we need to get a woman elected. I'm like, great, just please go to the ballot. But there was so much information that was sent out that it's just evil. It's one of our few things that we have is to vote and to get involved and to get active. And how we elect our public officials is key. It's a wake-up call. So what happened in 2016 is a wake-up call. And I think what has triggered the midterm elections was this idea of like, my vote counts. I'm going to be thorough with this information. I'm going to report. I'm going to be active. And so there's so much space for improvement. And I think that the quadratic voting might be a solution for that, because it provides fairness, it provides transparency, and it provides a whole new system that maybe we should explore. We have a broken system in our voting, and I think that when only 21% of people vote for candidate, that's not really fair. We really need to improve our voting. We need to have record numbers of people going to the ballot. So, but that means that we have to change our systems, that we have to improve them, that it cannot just happen, by our electoral college way. And that's what I like about coming here and hearing all these great ideas about changing different parties, figuring out ways for us to do better. So I'm open to any idea that can change that and can bring more fairness to voting, and for people to, be able to have more professionals and not just lawyers run for Congress. So.
And I think my last question is, just from being here over the past few days, is there anything in particular that really stood out to you that gave you a lot of optimism?
For the Congress? Well, like I said, a lot of the different ideas, different ways of approaching elections, different ways of engaging citizens. And one of the things that really triggered this, okay, we did a lot of things to make sure that we were, more technology savvy in the government. You have to understand, when we go into the government and we tell people who've been working there for 20, 30 years, we were gonna digitize everything. We're gonna take away your little file and we're gonna put it on the cloud. You have staring people going, what? Where is this cloud? This is not Star Trek. So it's so we were part of that moment, right? We were part of that. So how and it grew big, and I think being underregulated or might not have produced the best results. And I love the idea of looking at the algorithms that Tristan talked about yesterday. How do we come back, step back a little bit, and start looking at what needs to happen? So the GDPR, some people might have criticized it and so on in Europe. I think that the fact that there's a lot of people who believe that we need to really look and evaluate how technology is affecting our kids and our attention span and the medical side of things. I'm not saying to overregulate. Please, let's never do that. But let's start looking at how this new industry that literally grew in the last 20 years, how will it affect us, and how do we need to figure out how to work better together with them and to stimulate more growth, but to also to have dignified ways of doing it, to have valuable information, but at the same time protect our citizens.
I guess
I'm not running for Congress.
One last comment. I mean, just advice you've given me kind of working at a company like Consensus, and then there's a lot of uncertainty around how blockchain will be regulated, how you're basically like, you don't necessarily need to go to lobbyists. What people don't understand is anyone can just walk into Congress. And then, there's like the Smart City Coalition that Congress has and all these different things. And you're actually telling them, include blockchain, include this emerging tech in that. So I think that's very fascinating.
Yeah, we need to bring, so we have a whole, initiatives right now bringing back the Office of Technology Assessment, Tech for Congress. I literally split my time between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. I can't seem to get away from the idea of I need to stay involved because we're making wrong decisions. But it's because we need to help educate Congress, and we need to educate all the staffers. There's new caucuses, the Smart City caucuses, the 5G caucuses, the blockchain caucus, and I encourage people to get active, but then it's just lobbyists there. And so we need to bring more folks to the table, and they need to open up their communications as well with people like ourselves who are doing more stuff like this. So get involved. I'm just so thrilled of the new congressional folks that have come in. They're doing stuff. They're very active, and I can't support them enough. So we need your support to make that a reality.
Thanks. This has been inspiring, and it's been a pleasure knowing you, because I guess I was one of those people that was very disillusioned with government, and I think you've kind of opened up a whole new way to engage. So thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that, Natalia. And so listening to that panel, one of the most interesting parts of that actually came in the response to the question around taking action. And when you think about the beauty of a new idea, part of the beauty is doing the work and seeing that idea come to fruition. And part of the learning actually is getting the feedback as you do the work. So something to keep in mind for all of us here: get involved, get engaged, and make your ideas come to life. We're going to move on right now to our breakout sessions for the morning. We wanted to remind you again of the unconference sessions. Those are still going on, and there's still ideas that are being discussed out there. Reference your pocket agenda for the other breakout sessions. And just a reminder as well that we do have lunch at 12 today, so we hope you enjoy that between the breakout sessions. Thanks a lot. Enjoy.